The Arab-Nubian Shield has been known for a long time for its potential for a lot of metals. I mean, production in the area goes back through the millennia. But for a long time it's sort of been forgotten about. It was neither here nor there. It was neither Asia nor was it Europe. So it was like an area in between. And certainly with the discovery of oil in the early part of last century, the general attitude was, well, do we really need to pursue mineral assets if we're making so much money out of oil and gas? And so it sort of got pushed to the side. But then in the long run, with rising populations in the KSA and other countries in the region, you've got to make jobs. And the oil industry doesn't necessarily make an enormous amount of jobs. And mining is a great ancillary business to oil and gas because you have petroleum geologists, very much a different breed to a mineral geologist. But you've got mining schools. Once you're studying the geology of a region, it becomes quite obvious that particularly Saudi Arabia, but also countries on the other side like Eritrea, share this quite rich geology with big potential for gold, for copper, and then for a myriad of other minerals right down to things like tin. Many of these have not been exploited so far. Really only the focus has been on gold and on copper. But the potential to widen the net and bring a lot of other minerals in is enormous. And so really that's the attitude of the Western industry so far towards the region. It just looks like a big sort of blank spot on the map that we know is not blank. We just know that it's got potential, and so finally, the pivot is happening to that region. The thing is about energy and mineral processing these days is energy, energy, energy. And so many regions around the world that are minerally endowed, good example being Chile, are very poorly endowed with the resources to actually refine the metals, and refine the metals in a way that is efficient. For instance, for a country like Chile, you can bring oil and gas, coal, whatever, a very long way to start processing it there. Whereas if you've got the KSA and the other countries of the Gulf, they're virtually on the road between Asia and Europe. They have the Red Sea there, they have massive shipping going by, loaded with minerals, and yet much of this mineral wealth is not processed along the way, and it would make sense to do so. Well, it's an interesting challenge there, because theoretically the amount of money and resources that there are in the Middle East would suggest that money is the least of the issues involved here. If Saudi Arabia wanted to develop all its mineral resources, it definitely has the financial resources to do so. What it needs, though, is a managerial class with experience of organising mining projects. A mining project is very different to oil and gas projects. It's got a growing school of geologists, particularly women geologists, which is fantastic. And so, it's skill sets more than money that's needed here. It's knowing how to size up a project. You can start with something small and that requires a certain skill set. But when you're going big, you need other skills. And so Saudi Arabia is quite familiar with bringing in people with different skill sets to kickstart industries, particularly the oil and gas industry at the start was like that. They know how to do this. And they know at a certain point that they can also transition over from having the fly-in, fly-out crowd over to a domestically based, locally skilled population that are available for manning the mines. Well, the country has stability. We know that because there's been no upsets in the country for decades and decades, virtually since it was established as an independent state. So that's not the problem. What we haven't seen so much in the Middle Eastern region is the development of equity capital markets. No one talks about the stock exchange in Riyadh. I don't even know if there is one. And certainly at last year's Future Mineral Forum, there was no mention of it. So if there is a stock exchange there, maybe secondary listings for companies getting involved in the country would be a great idea, because obviously a lot of money out of the Middle East is managed in major financial centres, and never makes its way back into investments actually in the country. So if we can get an evolution of the equity capital markets and the debt capital markets in the country, then you also start to create more jobs, just not in mining, you create jobs in financial skills, and you end up, a good example being Dubai, of course, where, it's become a major financial center, and Riyadh does not want to be left behind in this race. We started, though, with the first forum happening right at the very end of the pandemic. There were virtually no Australians. Despite the fact that I'm Australian, I'm based here in London. So the only Australians that were really at that conference that were not based in Australia, because everybody was still locked down there. So very interesting this year to see that contingent there, because the Australians are a major part of the international mining community and have been active, Citadel Resources being an example, in Saudi in the past in copper. So this would be really sort of like a renaissance to get more Australians back in. And so I think that the mix at next year's FMF is going to be very different. In other developments, I think it's been an eye-opening moment also for the Saudis. They were a bit sort of like experimental in running this project. They didn't really know what to expect, and the turnout was massive from both locals and foreigners. I think you're going to be seeing a lot more foreigners there this year because they weren't sure what to make of it. There were also, extant lockdown restrictions that made it a hassle for people to travel anywhere. Now that virtually all that is gone, it's going to be a very interesting event. There were no Chinese at the event last year, and there probably might be many Chinese at it this year, but maybe in the year after, if China finally gets rid of its zero COVID policy or gets around it some way, you see more Chinese. And Chinese are an important factor in the international mineral community. And definitely Saudi Arabia is open to having skills and money and whatever come from wherever. So we shall see. That's the main thing. I think it was a very interesting initiative that is now just burgeoning. It'll be very interesting to see how it evolves from now on. Well, the energy transition itself is one of the motors, because when it comes down to it, there's too much material moving around in the world that powers the energy transition, whereas the Middle East is flaring off a lot of gas. That gas that's currently being flared off could be used for lithium processing, so is a good example. I mean, really, why would you take lithium from Latin America or Australia and then transport it all the way to China or Europe, when it would make a lot more sense to transfer it to the Middle East and use the Middle East as with its cheap energy and abundant energy and almost too much energy as the ideal place to undertake this activity.